Hey guys, so in this video I want to talk about why a ton of pro players like Tfue, Mongrel, 72 Hours, and Benji Fishy are changing their keybinds. This should come as a surprise to you because most of the players I mentioned actually qualified for the Fortnite World Cup. It seems almost backwards, right? If they're good enough to qualify and solidify themselves as a top tier player, why in the hell would they change their keybinds? We've all seen how ridiculously fast of a builder and editor Mongrel is. I could practice for like 20 hours a day and I still wouldn't be half as good as he is, yet even he decided to switch a few keybinds around. So what's going on? Why are the best players in the world, who would presumably have good keybinds already, be switching them now? And what exactly are they switching them to? I'm going to split the video into 3 different sections to kind of make it more organized and easier for you guys to follow. Feel free to skip around to any section you want, but I definitely recommend watching the whole video through because I guarantee 95% of you guys don't have optimal keybinds. With that being said, let's start with the why. The main reason pros are changing their keybinds is simple: the ones they have now are not optimal. I made a video a couple of months ago about why I changed some of my keybinds, and in it, I talked about my philosophy for optimal keybinds. At the time, my advice was that you want to be utilizing as many different fingers as possible. In theory, it makes sense why doing that would be the most optimal. Instead of pressing all your keybinds with 1 or 2 fingers, if you spread them out to 3 or 4, you would be faster and overall more comfortable while building. A lot of pros adopted this and stood behind it at the time. That was until the World Cup and the wall replacing meta came around. New names started popping up and dominating in World Cup qualifiers, while a lot of the established pros that we know and love unfortunately fell short. The most obvious thing they would look at to improve upon is their keybinds, and that's not for no reason. Your keybinds are easily the most important setting that you have control over in Fortnite. Because of how competitive the World Cup qualifiers were, a ton of pro players started to notice issues in their gameplay due to their keybinds. One common example is taking and replacing walls. Box fighting has become one of the most important aspects of high-level Fortnite gameplay. Every fight you get into against a good player usually turns into a box fight. World Cup qualifier matches became just box fighting and rotations, followed by even more box fighting and more rotations. This is all evidenced by the few players that qualified numerous times, like Dubs, Clicks, and Booga. All 3 of them are amazing box fighters with flawless mechanics. They take your wall with their 0 ping, they edit it before you even realize you lost the wall, and boom, you're dead. This means if you're bad at box fighting, you're at a huge disadvantage against good players. The main reason people struggle with box fighting is their keybinds. Doing all the quick builds and edits while constantly moving and trying to keep pressure on your opponent requires you to hit a lot of buttons very quickly. Without good keybinds, you'll mess up and either lose your chance to secure a kill or fail to protect yourself and get killed. Even outside of box fighting, many pros noticed how slow their building and editing was compared to some of the no-name players who were qualifying and doing well. Advanced high ground retakes were awkward or just straight up impossible for people to pull off if they didn't have the right keybinds. Now that qualifiers are over, everyone has had time to look at their keybinds, change them, and start practicing on their new ones. Even players that did qualify realized their keybinds could technically be more optimal and have decided to change them. What they changed them to is not my old keybind philosophy. There's actually a new one. Having different binds on different fingers is still very important, but now there's another addition to it. To be as optimal as possible, we want as many building keybinds as we can to be off our index and ring fingers. You're probably ready to say,
"What the F do you mean, Jarian? Our index and our ring fingers are the best fingers to use, you stupid idiot!"
Think about where your index finger and ring finger rest and what they do on your keyboard hand. Your ring finger presses A and your index finger presses D. A is your movement key to move left, and then D is your movement key to move right. By using fingers that are not your index, middle, or ring finger, you'll have more control of your movement while building and editing. And the reason I include your middle finger is because it should always be on W or S and never be used for any keybind, ever. The remaining fingers you can and should use on your keyboard hands are your pinky and thumb, and then for your mouse hands is your thumb. If you use any building binds on these fingers right now, then you'll know what I mean, but for those of you who don't, I'll help you understand why. Say you have your floor keybind on F like I do, and I press F with my index finger. Well, guess what? I also press D with my index finger to move right, which means if I do any sort of building technique using my floor, I won't be able to move right at the same time because I'm too busy pressing my floors with my index finger. One finger literally can't press two buttons at the same time, so if we want to be as optimal as possible and have total control of our movement, we want our building binds not on your movement fingers, which are your index and your ring finger. You want them on your thumbs and your pinky because your thumbs and your pinky do not press any movement keys like WASD. The even bigger problem though is that your movement is extremely important for doing things as fast and as optimal as possible. A basic example would be doing 90s to the right. Parallel beaks prove that the fastest 90s possible are when you do them holding down W and D and not just holding down W. When you're only holding down W, you're forced to stay towards the outer part of your ramp because you can't move to the right at the same time. But when you hold down W and D, you're able to go to the right and get higher up towards the middle of your ramp and thus do 90s faster. If you're like me and you don't have floor on either your thumbs or your left pinky, you'll be forced to do the slower 90s because you have to take your finger off of D to press your floor. On top of that, you won't be able to jump to the right while doing a cone jump and building a floor below you. You won't have full control of your movement while tunneling in late game scrims. With builds on your index and ring finger, you won't even be able to strafe side to side while building a basic wall or ramp. This could be a big reason why wall replacing might feel really bad and awkward for you. So my new advice is to put all your keybinds off your index and ring finger if possible, and if you can't, so you're forced to use your index or ring finger, put them as close as possible to WASD. The most optimal keybinds in my opinion would now be something like this. 2 keybinds on your mouse for your right thumb, 1 keybind on something like C, X, or V that you hit with your left thumb, and then 1 keybind on Shift, which should be hit with your left pinky. For a lot of different reasons, this really isn't feasible for everyone though, including me. I have 2 building binds on my mouse, which is my ramp and cone, but then my wall is on Q and my floor is on F. My pinky can only hit shift because I broke it a few years ago, so I literally cannot hit left control, and I already use shift for crouch, so I can't use that for anything else. And I also can't use my left thumb for anything other than spacebar because of the way I position my keyboard, so RIP. I still did take my own advice though, and I put 2 building binds on my mouse. Even though my wall and floor are on my movement key fingers, index, and ring, I still follow the second half of my philosophy, which is to make them as close as possible to WASD. You always want your fingers to be on top of your movement keys, WASD, but when you can't, put your remaining keybinds on keys like Q, F, E, R, Z, X, C, and V, since those are the closest keys to WASD. I even switched my edit key to E because of how close it was to WASD instead of G or C. Now the farthest key that I have to hit to build or edit is F, which is insanely easy to reach and really comfortable. It makes sense that the farther your keybinds are away from WASD, the less optimal and comfortable they are compared to ones that are closer. You may be really comfortable editing with G since you've edited on it forever, but F and E are much closer to WASD and are therefore more optimal. The last thing I wanted to mention is if you want to take it a step further and you're like me where you can only use 1 or 2 building binds on non-movement key fingers like your pinky and thumbs, is to make them your floor and or ramp. Your floor and ramp are the 2 builds you actually move on. You can technically move and walk over a cone, but it's not as common as a floor, and unless you're Spider-Man, it's impossible to walk on a wall, so put those 2 builds on your thumbs or pinky if you can. The only reason I'm hesitant to change my floor to my mouse button is because I don't really want to be a complete bot for a week when I have to record gameplays and stream and do other stuff. If I was a pro player though, or a competitive player looking to become the absolute best, I definitely put my floor on my mouse button as well. Before we move on to the last section where I analyze some pros keybinds who recently switched theirs, I'll sum up the new keybind philosophy once again. What you want now is to have as many building binds off your index and ring finger as possible. We want full control of our movement. To do that, put your build binds on your mouse buttons for your right thumb, bottom keyboard row for your left thumb, or shift for your pinky. If you do have leftover keybinds that need to be on your index or ring finger, put them as close as possible to WASD. And lastly, prioritize your floor and ramp as the 2 keybinds that are off your index and ring finger if you have to. 72 Hours was the first big player who changed his keybinds around a lot. He put his wall on his mouse button, which he hits with his right thumb, floor on his mouse, which he also hits with his thumb, cone on left alt, which he hits with his left thumb, and then because he can't use any more non-movement keys, his ramp is on E, which he hits with his index, and that's about as close to WASD as you can get. Tfue also changed his keybinds, but only for a couple of days. He tried out the double-edit keybind I talked about a little in my advanced settings video, but he didn't really stick with it or like it. The keybinds he came up were these: V for walls, which he hits with his left thumb, mouse buttons for floor and ramp, which he hits with his right thumb, and then left shift for cones, which he hits with his pinky. These were exactly what I said would be the most optimal, but I guess he didn't want to change them completely before the World Cup finals, which are less than a month away now. Then Benji and Mongrel changed their edit keys. Both of them had it on G, and Mongrel switched to F, while Benji switched to E. They followed the second half of my philosophy and put it as close as possible to WASD. Overall, I definitely think it's worth to change your keybinds and to follow this new philosophy. Following my advice will get you just about the most optimal keybinds as possible, so if you're looking for a fun way to get better, change your keybinds and go practice them. Also, let me know your current keybinds down below and if/what you're going to change them to. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and to turn on post notifications. Thank you to everyone using code Jarian. I'm going to be using the supporter creator money towards another giveaway, so if you're not using anyone's code, you might as well use mine. Otherwise, that's it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.